13 and 14 from the Book of Hours, which is the second part of Book 6 of the Martyrology. Each of the hours is composed in a particular hour of the day, so that I literally sit down and compose, say, this 13th hour between 6:35 a.m. and 7:35 a.m. The particular movement in this series is based on the fact that Ellie's and mine's first child was stillborn, and deals with that reality and the movement out of that reality. And there's a number of, besides the reference to Ellie and myself, there's the reference to a book of the Chinese poet Wang Wei's called Hiding the Universe, and a number of quotes from his work, and a reference to another book called Glimpses of Vanished Originals, which was a book about art that no longer exists. It's been destroyed by time, war, whatever the ravages. So I'll start with hour 13. I'll just read the hour of composition. 6:35 a.m. to 7:35 a.m. Briefly, the heart does break. The aching muscle in the chest carries more than the weight hangs from the body, from the barely perceiving brain, buried under the weight of loss, of grief. Brief moment of clarity, stillborn. I never know him, never name him, bury him under the greening tree in the shadow of the old stone wall, falls away from us, into the earth at birth, unborn again. When our son died, I feared Ellie'd die too. A gnawing in the mind, blind terror, I held her all night just to keep her to me. Though the heart pounds, the will shatters, you are broken. His spirit dead, our spirit, in this world, too quick, without explanation, gone. Drove into the countryside, hours on the road to Point Pele, south to the very bottom, skipped stones onto the lake, flick across the surface, and gone into another world, like my sister Donna, dead at 6 weeks, or Ellie's brother Robert, dead at 2 years, into the slow dissolve of memory. A life, love's loss, passes, this grief is past, in time, carrying, awake all night, and past us, slipped through that gap between the living and the dead, on, past this passing and this grief's hold, gone who was never ours to hold, past us, briefly, a life, times alike, less through loss, and yet the loss at last passes two of us. No baby makes three, not ours, alive or dead. Illusion of possession slips past us. God at all slips past us, so briefly. Basically, I used to say that if you could survive high school and still love poetry, you must really love poetry. And that had to do with the way it was taught at that time. And basically, kids were taught to be, as I was, to be frightened of poetry. That is to say, poetry had hidden meaning, and you were a dummy if you couldn't figure out the hidden meaning. So, therefore, you weren't taught, just say, the pleasure of the text, to borrow that phrase. You weren't taught as you are, like in music, to just take the pleasure from hearing the sounds. It doesn't have to have all that other stuff attached to it. But with poetry, there really was a whole bunch of garbage that came along with it. So I knew when I came out of high school and was writing poetry that I really loved poetry, but it didn't really have too much to do with my high school teachers. This is a book called Continental Trance, and this is the third section of the Martyrology. Book 6 follows on the Book of Hours, which is still in the process of composition, but this was written on the train traveling over the now discontinued line, which went up through Blue River to Edmonton, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, and to Toronto. And this is a poem written during that journey. And I'm going to read you a sequence of 2 pieces from it. Whistle, pulling over the level crossings in the gathering dark into Edmonton, drainage ditches gleaming in the last light, clusters of buildings and trees. As night falls, the sky reverses, dark clouds against a lighter blue, and the mind reverses, sleep takes, loosing the dream view. 2 hours from Saskatoon, fingernail of moon in the eastern sky, the pastel gray clouds at dawn blow over the pinkening horizon, train gathering speed all the while, the berth shakes back and forth over the prairie. The revelation is in the blue dome of air beneath which this train and the dawn appear, as blue as the robin's egg I found, age 2, shattered on the sidewalk, bits of curved blue flung all about, and the train of thought it led to. As blue as that imagined sky that day when the clouds were white and the prairies lay over the mountains in my future. One of my strong feelings is I'm basically a believer in using very few adjectives and adverbs. The reason for that is, I think, particularly the adjective, that basically when you use it, you're saying my noun is weak. My noun does not convey the meaning. So one of my feelings was, well, instead of going that way and trying to qualify the life out of nouns, why not try and re-energize nouns? Why not use them in ways that, through the rhythm of what you're doing and the context of what you're doing, invest those nouns with the power they have? Because finally, if you go through it from, say, a religious or mystic sense almost, the power lies in naming, like all the rituals that you read of, in, for instance, fantasy and science fiction stories, or horror Gothic literature around the notion of if someone knows your secret name, they have power over you, that whole thing. So the power, in a real sense, I think, resides in the name and the noun. I was born in Vancouver in 1944. My dad worked for the CNR. So what that meant was we moved regular as clockwork every 4 years. The way I always thought of it was Dad came home and said, I've got some good news and some bad news. And the good news was always that he'd been promoted, and the bad news was always that we moved. So that's where I was born, and I was raised in various parts of Western Canada. In Horn Pane, the sign on the building I could see from the road read, "Uthing." I reconstructed as "nothing" because it looked like it was falling down. A north thing called "nothing," that as Ellie and I drew closer, I read suddenly as "clothing," windows boarded up and broken. Like my lifelong wish that I might clothe myself finally in belief and realize the name of death is nothing, the name of after death is nothing, except, Lord, Mother, Father, the briefness of this life you've granted is bliss. If you're going to write, and if you literally want to communicate with other people, there's going to be people who love your work, and there's going to be people who hate your work, and to a degree, that's literally their right. I think there's nothing wrong in writing that doesn't reach a very big audience. I think the problem comes in when you're writing that way and you feel really robbed because the world is not beating a path to your door. I just think that's kind of a crazy way of thinking. So you should have a pretty good grasp on the kind of writing you're doing, which you can only get to by going back to the beginning, which is to say you can only get to it by writing lots and lots and learning, really learning how to read your own writing. That's often the hardest thing for a young writer to do, which is what they're reading is their intent. They read what was in their mind when they set out to write, and they look at the poem and they see in it everything that was their intention, and they think, wow. But someone else reads and they say, I don't know what you mean. And it's true, they don't, because most of the text is still inside the writer's head. So the more you write, the more you get a handle on that. And in general, I found the whole thing of I can't write anyways is a false formulation. Usually what the person's saying is, I can't write well. You can write, but you're writing real garbage. So that's the problem for you. And very often what you have to do at a time like that, and it is very painful, is you have to sort of write your way through just a lot of bad writing. Missed again at dawn. Heading into Toronto, end translates home. 7 a.m., August 2nd, 1981. St. Clair to Union Station, through the junkyard to the backyard gardens, decaying brick factories. Scrawled across the one wall, I wanted to be an anarchist. An ending in itself, unending. Which is the final poem in the sequence. When I'm writing poetry, I very often just start with a word or maybe a line. And in poetry, basically my poetry, say the main work of my poetry, not all of it, but the main work of my poetry, has been devoted to a notion of process. That is to say, that I will let what occurs in the moment occur. I will track what is occurring in the moment. If I think it's worth preserving, I'll preserve it. And if I think it's garbage, I can chuck it in the wastebasket. The strength of process is that you move closer to the way the mind actually operates in the moment of composition, which is one of the questions that's, how does the mind operate? Where does its attentions move? The weakness of process is that if your mind hasn't moved on, in terms of thought, in terms of what your focus is, you basically end up writing the same poem over and over again. Like, why do I write? Why wasn't I a painter? Or why wasn't I a cinematographer or something else? I don't know. I know that when I sit down to write, that's what obsesses me. To write is, not in a certain driven sense, but I feel most alive when I write. I feel most in touch with myself. And it keeps me, in a real sense, sane in the world. And I feel fortunate that I've lived at a moment in history, in a situation in which I've literally had the leisure to write. That I haven't had to take a gun and go out and be busy killing people to to get other things. I've been able to write, because that's certainly not been possible for everyone. Well, you see, one of the things that happens when you begin to focus on the poem on the page, of course, is you become aware of the alphabet in a kind of absolute sense. Now, I'd always, even as a little kid, had this strong feeling about the alphabet anyways. I have a favorite letter, which is the letter H, and all those sorts of things. So, in focusing on the page, I became very aware of the alphabet, shapes of letters, which is why I started spelling my name with the lowercase b and the lowercase p, simply because of the synchronicity of the b and the p and the d and the q, except d and q weren't in my name. One of the nice things about the alphabet, just as itself, is that when I write an A, the letter A, I bring a letter A into the world. So that there's this very direct experience of creation that happens in a real sense with the alphabet. I'm not just giving you the sign for something that's out there. I'm giving you, in a literal sense, the thing itself. So this is a poem called A Small Song That Is His, and it's from a book called Love, a Book of Remembrances. And the title Love has to do with, of course, love of the alphabet. And the remembrances have to do with the fact that, of course, we remember not only in images, but that we remember in language and through the alphabet. And many of these pieces, literally what I was doing was the discovery that I could write single letters in what I felt to be poetic patterns and create my own rhythms and texts with them. So the mixture of single letters and words and so on to create things that move closer, therefore, to being just music. They don't have, per se, content in the same way. Though this one, obviously, in the title, A Small Song That Is His, and in how it goes, as you will see, has content. A door, a door, a door, a door, an opening, an O, an H, a leg, a table, or a window and a W, a sky that is D, a lake that is F, E. D, E, F, 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 D, D, E, 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 D, F, F, E, F, E, F, E, F, E. Me, you or me, or I, H, and D, M, E, E, F, D, O, D, F, H, E, W, F, F, E, W, H, D, O, W, D, F. I build an imaginary staircase, a fiction, if you like. I know it's a fiction, I know it's imaginary, but I walk up those imaginary stairs, I get to the top, I open this imaginary window, I look out, and there's the real world. And I see it from an angle I wouldn't see it from otherwise. A lot of my work is based on an almost mystical, magical belief in the power of language, the power of words, to communicate larger senses and larger experiences, that they exist as, to a certain degree, a thing almost in themselves, a world in themselves, through which you enter other worlds and are in contact with them.